about everyone. That's great. If you are not a member already, please consider becoming a member. Not only does your membership get you unlimited visits to the greater part of the museum, but it also gives you admission to every speaker presentation that we have. So it's a good deal all the way around. So please consider that. A couple of upcoming events I'd like you to know about coming up on May 26th. It's the Friday Art Walk in downtown St. John. We're going to have the Antique Car Club in front. So just make a night of it. We're going to keep the museum open that evening for a while. So, make a swing around all part of the town on the 26th. And on the 17th, if you haven't heard, we've got the Jurassic Mystery Dinner Theater. And it's going to be the case of the missing skull. And you can bet the missing skull is a dinosaur skull. So please consider that. Tickets are available online or down at our gift shop. So a couple housekeeping notes. If you need to use the restroom, feel free. We're all totally informal here. 10 steps down this hallway, hang a left, you're there. So let's get started with our speaker presentation. Our presenters tonight really need no introduction. Everyone knows who they are. Mueller, as well as Jim Baker. And our presentation tonight is sponsored by Dante Construction Incorporated. So we certainly thank them for sponsoring tonight's speaker presentation. So without further ado, take it away.
Next step. Well, I was thrilled when Jim asked me to do this. It's a subject that's really near and dear to both of our hearts. And as we look back on history, as we frequently do, we think about the things that are no longer with us. And, there's we have a ghost tour here in town, and there's also, over the years, a lot of references to ghosts. But I thought there's going to be ghosts too. Some that were here and that are no longer here. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we do our research, some of the tools we use. The first thing is something called the Sanborn maps. These were some really interesting things that the Sanborn Insurance Company did in towns all over the United States. They would go in and they'd make a map, and they would tell you if the house was made out of brick, if it's made out of stone, if it was wood, it would show outbuildings, all of that sort of thing. There's a little key that goes along with these things. They could be adobe. So they would say there was a gas engine in it because of the fire and that sort of thing. So in St. Genevieve, we actually had 5 years worth of these things. Now, the first 3 years, 1894, 1901, and 1911, there's only 4 of these maps. And they really are kind of the downtown area. Then in 1929, they started expanding it. We had like 7, I believe, or 8 maps that go out into the burbs, as I call it. And we don't have those in color. I'm sure they are in color someplace. We just don't have copies of those. One of the other things we use are paintings, believe it or not. This one you see here is up at the Missouri History Museum. We believe it's about 1850 because there is we think, a telegraph pole in the lower right-hand corner. And this thing was amazing in terms of its detail. I actually brought this from Jim. But you can see over there on the left, you can see the church, which is the stone church. You can see the Gregoire House, and you can see the Jockey Board House. So we kind of look at those sort of things and say, oh, it's about 1850, what's on the painting? And see if there are houses there that are no longer here. And then there's one of my favorite artists, Oscar, Grisselbarn. He probably shouldn't be. But he had an amazing eye for detail. And so a lot of times when we're looking at photographs and paintings and drawings, we not only look at what's in front, we look at what's in back. Because sometimes you see stuff you've never seen before. We're blessed with 2 panoramic views of St. Genevieve. Well, I think we're all familiar with the Laurel and window, but there was an earlier one. It showed up in the 1908 Growers magazine. And there's a few differences between it. We know that the 1908 one was taken by Vincent Dunker, our famous photographer here in town. And you can see some of the detail when you blow that up. Pretty amazing. This is the share house here. This is the Southern Hotel. There's the old brick. You see the church up there. So there's a lot of detail that in these things that tell us about the past of St. Genevieve. One of the things was that there was no South Gabbery Creek for a while. It actually went across the creek and went out down the St. Mary's Road. We also had, 1935 was our bicentennial year, and there's actually an overhead view of downtown St. Genevieve. I found this out at the library, but it's an amazing detail of the 6 lower blocks or middle blocks of downtown St. Genevieve. When you really get into the detail of this, then you wouldn't have believed the gardens that are behind the houses in St. Genevieve in 1935. Sometimes we come across other old photographs. This is, I guess, the Verst House. That's where Pat Parker lived. That hole in the ground is where Pat Parker's house is, or is now. Of course, the Pat's still also with us. And down here, you can kind of see a view of what we call the Francois Valley 2 house. Patty Maggard would say that's her home when she was a kid. It's a sex art house. But what's kind of interesting about this is we can see this house right here, and that's the house that Tom Greminger grew up in. And we can't find a picture of the front of that house. And it burned down. It's right next to the foundation office. One of the other things we're blessed with is something called HABS, Historic American Building Survey. A Missourian started this. He was an architect, and he went around the United States looking at old buildings and documenting them. And sometimes we see they will include pictures of them, various pictures of the outside and the inside, and sometimes they did measured drawings, which we really dearly love. And then back in the 80s, another group, was that Osmond Overby that came in with that to redo some of that. So we'll be looking, we look at those, and again, looking what's behind the buildings, not just because most of those buildings are still here, except for this one. Which house? That was the Misplay House down on St. Mary Road. So that's something that is no longer there. The well's still there, but not the house. Other things that we look at, we're not bashful about looking at other people's books and photographs. Sometimes they sneak in some really neat ones. Husky on St. Genevieve on the left had talked with Pat Parker a lot, included a lot of her photographs in there. Mark Evans has a lot from his the Comment/Ride. Bill Nagger's book is an awesome book. Most of it, there are a few pictures in there of houses that we no longer have, so that was good. Other things we look at are the newspapers. I don't know if you know it, but the Fair Plays online, the first 50 years of it, searchable at the Library of Congress. So we started looking for building permits, which started in about 1907 here in town. We just looked, you can actually search it. This one is from 1873. It says Mrs. Johnny's residence on Merchant Street is rapidly approaching completion. A new fence has been built in front, and the appearance of the street is much improved. That's my house. You recall, I used to say Joseph Bogier, and well, it was torn down, and John Whitlock, the local architect, was the architect of my house, and so this is when I know when my house was built. Other things are deeds. Spent a lot of time up in the courthouse and recorder of deeds office looking at who bought what when, and sometimes, just because they bought a piece of property doesn't mean the house was on it or built yet. So I have to look sometimes at property records. I really like the French. Oh, they were marvelous. When they had a deed, they said, It's a lot in town of a certain size, of 1 by 2 apartments. There's a Potomac interior house on it, a 20 by 25 PEDs. There's a corn crib, a 10 by 12, a chicken house, everything but the crib. You never see. So that's another great thing. I mean, with our records going back into the 18 or 1750s, a lot of times we'll even go back that far to search out deeds. So I want to go back to our earliest, tonight we're going to talk about the 12-block area of the downtown. And I call that, kind of broken up into east and west, and the west is the church end of the downtown, and the east will be down about Main Street. So you can see all the different kinds of buildings in 1894 that we had in these 6 blocks on the west side of the downtown. There were a few made of stone, a lot of made of brick, and quite a few outbuildings on there too. They didn't always say what the outbuildings were. Usually on a major building, they will have like a D for a dwelling or an S for a store, or sometimes a saloon. We had quite a few of those too. So that's a good starting point. One of the things I did is I went into that 1894 and took off all the buildings that are no longer with us. This is 125 years ago. And you can see a lot of the brick buildings are the ones that stay. It's pretty amazing. It doesn't get any better when we go to the downtown east. This would be between Gabourey and Jefferson, Main to 3rd Street. So you can see again, there's some nice brick buildings, and there are a few stone buildings. St. Genevieve in those days never had many stone buildings. We had stone foundations, but it was still pretty well populated. It included a lot of the historic homes like the Bolduc and the J.B. Valley, and in 1894, the Menard Valley House in Felix Valley. But when you take off all the buildings that are no longer with us, that's what those blocks look like. To give you an idea, in 1894, I counted 109 buildings, major buildings, homes, businesses, churches, schools. 53 of those are left, about 50%. It's even worse with outbuildings. There were 197 outbuildings. There are 6 left. We have lost so many treasures. The ones that are left are like the ice house and the barn that's behind the winery and the building behind where the Steiger downtown was, the ice house behind where Stan has his building. So those are still here, but we have lost so many outbuildings that gave character to our community. So that's how we got there and started looking at it. I'm going to turn it back over to Jim, who's going to talk about a few of the houses that have disappeared like ghosts. And then I'll talk about some after that. So, James?
Thank you, Bob. When Bob and I first discussed the idea of doing this, we kind of set the parameters, and he said, Jim, nothing longer than 3 hours. We're good for that. So now the most difficult thing I have to do next is to decide which way is up and which way is down. Well, I did it. I got to actually have these. This is a beautiful shot of early St. Genevieve. Does anybody have a sense of what you're looking at?
You're looking south towards St. Mary's Road.
You all.
Isn't that the
We all drive this road 100 times a day. And you would have seen this beautiful stone wall here. Right over here is the Moses Austin Out building, and right over there is the John MacArthur House. So that's one of the views, but now it's before 1902. That's when the Presbyterian Church was built, and it's before the trestle. So this is kind of a little bit of age to it. But there's an interesting thing going on here with that wall. In 1824, in October, there was a complaint of trespass, and that was a legal terminology that you find in the documents in the court records. If anybody did anything to you that you didn't like stole something or smashed your window, it was a complaint of trespass. And so there was one filed by two brothers, Joseph and Bernard Pratt, and they were filing it against a guy named Sebastian Butcher. Well, that name is going to become more familiar to all of you after tonight. The Pratt brothers were pretty well-to-do guys, and Louis Bolduc owned that corner block. And right next door to him on Main Street was a quarter block owned by the Pratt brothers. So that's where they were. Here is a great old early photo of the Bolduc after it's been altered in through the years. I'd say this is in the late 1800s, early 1900s. But look at this beautiful 6-foot tall stone wall along there. Hard to believe that was still there. What happened is a little more interesting. In the line, the complaint, it says, on the first day of August, 1824, the said Sebastian, which would be Sebastian Butcher, entered and broke down the stone wall and carried away the stone material. Well, that cheeky fellow, what is going on? I still use this photograph in all the walking tours I do with students, and what I love to do is have the students look at the picture, and then I say, and look, the wall is gone. Well, the wall left a lot later than good old Sebastian Butcher. But something did happen. Does that name sound familiar to you guys? Sebastian Butcher? It does to Bob. Anybody else? There were two German stonemasons who came up here from Cape Girardeau. One was Michael, one brother. His wife was Peggy, and the other brother was Sebastian. And out of the two, I think maybe Sebastian was slightly less insane than Michael. But these guys were talented stonemasons. In fact, there was a document in the 1790s that someone swore that they should be allowed into Upper Louisiana because they were such talented stonemasons and we needed them desperately here. So they come here, but the minute they blow into St. Genevieve, there's trouble brewing. There were fights, there was a divorce, there was a charge of alienation of affection, shall we say. And there was this complaint, the stone wall's gone. These guys were stonemasons, and they sued Jacob Phillipson, the gentleman who built and first owned the Phoenixville LA house. They sued him over the price. I suspect this was the way of the Butcher brothers of taking into a dispute into their own hands over money. And so what do you do if the judge won't do what you want to do? You go in and take your stone back. He probably didn't get too much because there it is. But what I found out in the last couple of weeks working on this, there's some other interesting pictures of this. Here we are at Bolduc again with that great picket fence out in front. But look, here's the stone wall already carried down to those great little Victorian houses that are still in those streets. So when those houses were first built, they had a 6-foot stone wall out in front. But the stone wall didn't survive, as we're sad to say, and that's why it's on our list tonight. Here are some great Habs photos done in the 1930s of the Bolduc property. So what I want to point out to you here is this photograph, which I had to look carefully to see. There's a great section of that stone wall still in place. And it didn't go to the Bolduc property, it just came to that corner. But there it is in probably 36. The next year's photos in 37, look, it's gone. And in fact, that tree is gone. And they're clearing out that thing. I would guess that was about the year that little brick bungalow next to Bolduc got built. And they wiped all that material out. I would also venture to guess that if you could do some kind of a spiffy little analysis and look at the foundations of those buildings, you're going to find a good chunk of the stone wall that started out there. And I suspect if you walk around that corner from Main to Gabourey and look, you're going to see a section of stone wall still there. And I suspect that could even be a portion of the base of that stone wall that's still there. It's remarkable. Another beautiful house. Golly, look at that French colonial house. They put them like this in a book because they're just so wonderful and so full of the style that we're used to seeing. But this house, you can see, this is no museum house. This is a house in its heyday when it was being lived in and used. The lady who lived there obviously loved plants or bushes or espaliered trees or something on her front porch. That maybe was Madame Gregoire or one of her kids' wives. I think this is a marvelous picture. It tells us a whole lot. Bob has given me another copy of this picture, which is slightly different resolution, but he pointed out to me, and correctly so, there's a little bit of a line in the roof where you can see that the house has been re-roofed, and there's a little difference in the height. And so it tells me that this house maybe started out as a smaller house, maybe only this wide, and then it was added on to. That's just something that we can't prove today because, of course, the house is not there. Does anybody know where we should be looking for this place? Where? Pardon? Where? This is another one you go past every day.
Main Street.
Does it say? No. It is. Merchant
Merchant what?
Merchant and Ford. It's
Where the Dunsey house is, correct?
There you go.
yes. Exactly. So, I'm missing my face. This house, we know from the ad, the house was for sale in 1812. I'm certain the house was built in the late 1790s, early 1790s, but it was for sale. And here's the great ad that was published up in the newspaper up in St. Louis by Mr. Gregoire, Charles Gregoire. He was quite a well-known merchant. He owned several different buildings, several different businesses. He was a well-to-do guy, and this house represents that. The house is 56 feet long. So you look at the Gibor Valley house today, it comes in at about 51 feet. And so this was a slightly larger house. So this was a private house. It says it has 5 rooms, 3 of which have chimneys, bing, bing, and bing. Great windows, shutters, windows in the attic space up above for added space. The lot contains 1.5 acres. Most advantageous in St. Genevieve for any trade or almost any business. Any person wishing to purchase the premises will please apply to Mr. P. Lee, a merchant in St. Louis. He had an agent in St. Louis. Great building. Here is a little later photograph of it. And this points out some changes. And the reason these series of photographs that we've been able to find are also important is because houses weren't static. They made changes. And we're trying to understand the changes in houses we can see, like the Gibor. How did that change over time? But this gives us another building to look at changes. Do you remember on that other picture, the front steps came right out between those 2 posts, right out here? But this has changed, like a lot of houses did in St. Genevieve when they got tired of those steps sticking out into the sidewalk. Felix Valley is like that. There's lists after lists of houses that were like that. They did away with that. They plugged that up with a gate across, filled it in, and look what they did. Just like a green tree, they come down the front side, and the steps exit from the side of the porch, not across the front. Same elements. Look, beautiful 12/12 sash. Very typical again when you see the arrangement of doors and windows on the front of the house. Every room would have had its own access to the porch, so that requires a door in just about every room. You see the evidence of that coming there as well. I did a quick read of the estate papers when Monsieur Gregoire passed away, which was in 1832. It was pages and pages and pages. This was a wealthy family. I read through the list just for interesting articles. This was included as the house and the lot on the hill. So that was the hill that we're talking about behind the church. 2 snuff boxes, a pair of silver salt cellars. Felix Valley had one. A silver tea set, a large gilt frame glass, a wire fender. You guys know what a wire fender is? It's the little thing that would go out in front of your fireplace. Just keep those popping out on your floor. A dozen Liverpool plates. Those were English ceramics made in Liverpool. 12 gilt framed engravings. People just did, in general terms, have those kind of things in their house. A damask carpet. That would have been a very elevated piece. 16 volumes of the Gentleman's Cultivation. So, he fancied himself a gentleman farmer. A cherry bedstead, a pair of decanters, a set of bed curtains, a set of window curtains, a timepiece, a clock, 9 sheets, 4 pillowcases, and 12 napkins. This was a well-to-do household. And you've all seen this illustration in the museum, I'm sure. Right back here behind the church is that simplified version of the Gregoire house. We've looked at it for years and years and years and years. But that's it. The poor Gibor Valley house here didn't even get that much back there. It's hidden away and not so much. But that's from 1879. These are 2 great articles in the paper that Bob came across. And these say words, volumes to me about what's going on. Some of this city's old landmarks have recently succumbed to the destroyer's invasion. An attachment born long ago to many of our citizens causes regret at the sight of their demolition, but when we know they give way to progress in modern structures, we are mollified. That's in 1908. Personally, I'm not so mollified. It's progress, and at that time, in 1908, progress was a good thing. If we could turn back time and get to some back of these things, it would be wonderful. But this is our way of not losing those connections with those other original buildings. The wrecking parties, which sounds like a TV show on HGTV, the wrecking party, have been at work since last week, taking down the old grocery house, which is on Merchant, lately bought by Frank Huck, and the old Gnome building, which is one of the final owners of this property, building on 4th Street. Bought by the Honorable P.H. Huck. Up-to-date buildings will soon take the place of the old ones, sadly. But we do have an amazing building on that location. So the Judge Huck House is the location for the Charles Gregoire. Here's another gorgeous house, and I had not seen this picture since Bob said, "Hey, look at this." A few
We're
months
actually up at the Riverville Library.
Yes, but that thing. This is a marvelous building, which I did not. Someone showed me this and said, "Does this say Genevieve?" I said, "Oh no, we didn't have anything like this." Oh, we did. There it is. This is a close-up of that fire insurance map. Here's the house on the fire insurance map. So when you're looking at that house, you can see what it represents here on the map. The pink color is a building made of brick. Obviously, that's a brick building. These yellow things with the dotted lines, those are outlines for porches. These are great windows, and I've made a point to look at those windows because we can't go to the building anymore and see what kind of nail, what kind of thing. The windows are sometimes the key to knowing a little more about the date. These are 6/6 stacks, so 6 lights over 6. And I think the window glass measures about 10 by 14. They match the windows at my house. And my house's windows were replaced right about 1850. And my guess is this house comes in fairly close to that same date. When we start to look at the gentleman who owned it, we're going to figure out that. Does anybody know where Charles Rozier lived? Joe Rozier?
Wasn't this where the parking lot is for Audubon?
No,
Across
that was
from
an
the
Rozier house, you're right.
Maybe
It was a
I heard it was a
beautiful
Rozier
brick
house.
I know where it was. It's in Main and Merchant.
No,
No? Main and Market.
no.
No?
Aren't you glad you came tonight?
I know.
We're gonna get to that point. Here's another, this must have been a really great day in St. Genevieve. That day in December or January when it snows so much it breaks down the trees. I think that's what happened, and somebody said we better get a picture of this. So here they are. I love the scallop fence out in front.
Mhm.
It just sets the whole thing off. Beautiful building with these lintels above the windows out of stone, beautiful shutters. This is a great house. This is built by Charles C. Rozier, one of the sons of the founder of the Rozier family, Ferdinand Rozier. He was the 9th child, so the Roziers were running the course here. He was quite an enterprising young man, had a terrible, tragic thing happen to him as a young man. The description that's in the book, Between the Gabber, is fascinating. It says it was a really hot summer day, according to the family story, and the maid or whoever was taking care of the kids wanted to cool him off. And they dumped him down in a well or something full of really cold water. And he had some reaction to that, and he, I don't know if it was instant or close, but he became paralyzed, really paralyzed. And they tried all sorts of cures, of course, to reverse this. Someone came to town. This sounds shady, but this is a story. Someone came to town, a Native American person with a cure, and they said, okay, if you just do what I tell you to do, and you pay me, we'll fix this. So I think they were desperate. He took him to the butcher shop and laid the kid in, I don't know how to say this other than to just say it, the guts of a butchered animal, and let him sit in there until it all cooled back down.
Mhm.
He couldn't walk perfectly, but he did learn back to walk. And he used 2 canes for his lifetime. Nothing ever was said in this about in letters and things, but finally at his in his obituary, it's mentioned. This is a house. He was married to a daughter of the Legrand family, who at this time lived in the Jean-Baptiste Valet house, Marie Emily Legrand in 1859. My suggestion is that this house was built right after their marriage. If you look at the other sons and their houses, which were built in the late 1840s, they have a lot of the very same features. I think the Roziers had a certain image they were projecting with architecture of their buildings, and they built beautiful quality, lovely buildings to stand. This is one of those buildings.
I don't know where it's at.
Yeah, where's that?
Oh, they're going to figure it out. So, he had quite a career. He went to St. Vincent's College in Cape Girardeau. He was the second young man to graduate from St. Vincent's. He was an attorney. He started 3 different newspapers, the St. Genevieve Democrat, the St. Genevieve Plain Dealer, and he changed the name of one of them to the Creole. Nice guy. He was an attorney and had read for the law. This was his little law office right there, and you can see there's the house, there's the office right there, and that's the building. We go past this one every day, folks, too, I hate to tell you. He was appointed to the first board of the Board of Regents, for which became Southeast Missouri State University, the normal school at that time. He was the mayor of St. Genevieve from 74 to 76, and again from 1879 until he died in 1897. Okay, last call for where he is. These buildings are still standing.
Merchant,
It's on Merchant.
across from the post office.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's not Merchant, it's Market.
Market.
So the big parking lot?
With the word line.
The property on the late Mayor C.C. Rozier Market Street was sold by Felix Rozier, who was his brother, this week to Dr. Rutledge for the sum of $2,800. We understand the doctor will move his family back to St. Genevieve.
Yeah.
It became this. Stanton Garage built there, which opened in the 1850s. We had Stanton Garage for a while. We had another lovely period of architectural glory when it was the County Services Building. That was the spot. And now we're back to a parking lot. So we've gone from the highs down to no architecture at all.
Yeah, that's what.
So that great building, actually, the back of that property backed up to the back of his parents' property. So I suspect that was the draw for that location right there. Another one. This is a valet house.
Is that the,
Anybody guess? I'll tell you if you're right.
is that,
We drive past this one every day too.
is that the building that was the bank that Jesse James brought?
Ding, 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 ding. Yes, right on the corner of Merchant and Main Streets. And today it's where the little pergola is, across from Audubon. So, this is the story of one of those valet sons. And you all know Jean-Baptiste Valet, the old guy in the corner house for the National Park Service is today. He had 4 sons, Francois Baptiste, Jean-Baptiste Jr., Louis Valet, and the youngest, my best buddy, Felix Valet. Those were those 4 sons. Jean-Baptiste was born in 1783. He married, I want to get the date right, he married Marie-Louise Janice in 1815. She did not last through the 3rd childbirth. I think that's what caused the problem. She died in 1827. So, Jean-Baptiste Jr. did the next logical thing. He married her younger sister. That was in 1829, and she survived him. She died in 1848. But he died in 1837. So, this house was actually built on one end of the lot owned by Jean-Baptiste Valet. They didn't even subdivide the property when it was originally built. I suspect either the house was built slightly before he passed away in 1837 or right about the time he passed away. And my thought is perhaps that the house was built by Jean-Baptiste Valet Sr. as a place for his daughter-in-law to live with those children. So I think that's the tie-in to this house and the Valley House. I want to point out a couple things on it.
Is that Jimmy?
Here's our lot.
Is that great?
It's okay. Here's the house right here. It fronts up on Merchant Street. It went down along Main, and this eventually became part of that big lot. You want to look at a couple important things here for the date of this, and by the windows, those again are 12/12 lights, which were how windows, that sash that was used from 1812, 1818. I think that's pretty early. By the 1840s, they'd switched to those larger pieces of glass. You have fewer lights and about the same size window, but this is a pretty good indicator that that's a fairly early house. This went from being a residence to a commercial structure. Banking, all sorts of things took place there, all sorts of businesses. That story. It eventually became a pretty well-known bank that was involved the Rogers, and here's Furman Rozier, the president, and Mr. Robbins, Jesse B. Robbins, who's an attorney in town. So those came on as part of the process. There were a lot of things that happened there. Of course, in 1873, Jesse James made a little undisclosed withdrawal out of the bank. The Union troops in the Civil War made another undisclosed withdrawal from the bank. There was an auto repair place there, becomes Anderson, Roth Motors, Anderson Chevrolet, the Standard Oil station with Mr. Gurley, and then it became the place for Lawrence and Thorpe. And there we are today with the pergola. And what I like right there is that original photograph of that picture of where that is, right in place. Another one. This is my last one. I'm sorry, Bob, you're not giving me the end of this one. Anybody idea where this one is? Great little, this is a stone building, incidentally. Here's the roof line.
Is that his house?
Whose?
I said, is that his house? Your house?
Nope.
Oh.
This is a stone, beautiful stone house. Dr. Sargent, Ichabod Sargent, was born in New Hampshire in 1792. He comes out this way, gets married to a girl from over in Kaskaskia, and comes to St. Genevieve. He joins Dr. Lane here. He joins Senator Dr. Lynn here. There are a number of physicians right here about that time. Here's another shot of it. Here, hiding behind that cute little fence. Here's the house on the map, right here. It's blue, that means it's stone. Here's 2nd Street, that ought to be blue. I want to go through one quick person because I find her interesting. This is Isabel Sargent, one of Dr. Sargent's daughters. He had, I think, 3 or 4. She was born in 1825. This is her daughter. Her name was Grace Isabel Valley January. She married a gentleman in January. She was born in 52. She lived to 1919. She was a granddaughter of Dr. Sargent. She married Jesse Lindell January in 1875. Do those names sound at all? Bob, where are you going? It's going all by itself. Are you trying to tell me something? Anybody ever heard of Jesse Lindell January?
No. February, but not
St. Louis? Have you heard of Lindell Boulevard?
Yes.
Then you've heard of this guy. Have you heard of January Hall at Washington University?
No.
Well, then you've heard of this guy.
Brookings Hall. I used to eat there.
Have you heard of Brookings Hall?
Yes.
Yes.
Her daughter, Isabel January, married Mr. Brookings, who was responsible for much of the early start of Washington University.
Yes.
He was also the guy who started the Brookings Institute outside of Washington.
Okay.
This was a young woman who was born in 1876. She married Mr. Brookings later in her life in 1927. She built January Hall as a gift to Washington University in honor of her mother, this lady right here, who at the time of her demise gave her daughter over $1 million.
Wow. She should have been my mother.
So these are fascinating ways. Talk about a powerless people in Central. Those Isabel folks. So here we are back at that house. I want you to see what they did here, which is really, I think, kind of weird but interesting as well. I believe this house started out just this smaller one. They wanted to enlarge that attic to make the space more usable, and they raised the roof, and that's filled in with siding, and this is still stone. Okay, last guess for where this is, and let me give you an even more exciting thing.
Oh, God.
It's still standing today.
Oh.
Down the street from you?
This is a clue.
Oh,
Oh, my God. Mortuary.
The Stanton Mortuary became a mortuary in 1929, so they took that little house and they made a mortuary.
Wow.
Warren Stanton, who I assume was his father, an uncle. Thank you, Bob. So this building became that building. So you see they made a few changes. They added that stone porch in the front. They added those crazy little dormers up the roof line. But that was in 1939, after Jerry Stanton took over and made some more structural changes. All right. You were going to get a ride in quite a sweet car.
You'd never feel a thing.
Any guesses? Final guesses? You know where it is?
2nd and Market.
2nd and Market.
There you go.
Can you tell me where that house is on 2nd and Market?
It's on the northwest corner.
I mean, in that huge building.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. It's on the inside.
Oh.
I've always wondered why in this house, in the funeral home, it had this in the middle of that. Why would they bother to do that? You go around the other side. Why would they bother to do that? This is the original peak of that little stone house that Dr. provided.
They added that extra on for his mother.
They added that back portion, and then when Woods made their alterations, they added the section on the front. One more little quick pick. Bob and I got to go in there just a month or two ago when the Lutheran Church was taking things out. What they did was they exposed all the original material that's left from that little stone house. And we took a few pictures. Here's a great ceiling joist. Goes across the ceiling with those beaded edges. Here's a section of baseboard that looks like it came out of the house was put in yesterday.
Wow.
And he did edges. There we go.
Wow.
So that's one that did survive. We just barely knew it.
Yeah.
All right. Over to Bob. I hope I didn't take too long, Bob. Sorry.
I should have been Jim has the advantage, he did all the work to put the diorama together. That's an interesting lecture in its own right, what he did to do that. But I'm not going to go into as much detail about people, but does anybody know where this building was?
Corner of
Second and Southgate.
Fourth
and Merchant.
Carter, Fourth and Merchant. Anybody know what it was called? Well, it was called the Pratt Warehouse. A guy named Joseph Pratt had owned that property. He was a merchant. The Pratts were, as Jim said, pretty well-to-do people. And so he had this little warehouse, and you can see the church in the background, so you know where it is. That picture's after 1911. Another view of it going down, going down 4th Street. Where that building is now, it is where the parish center is. Now, that wasn't always the parish center, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I think they believe that about 1867, they built this beautiful structure on the left. Anybody know what that was? That was the old convent. The Sisters of Loretto had come to St. Louis in 1838, and they settled in, they had a school for girls, of all things.
Of all things, imagine that, girls.
Little boys
Educated
would go to
girls,
school
what
there,
do?
or they all of them. They would teach them to be refined young ladies. That was in the building where Legal Board is, and it was the Genevieve house next to it. It was a big two-story. I was going to do it later, maybe in another lecture. But in 1858, the Sisters of Loretto, they had moved up to the Pratt Warehouse, and then they left, and the Sisters of St. Joseph came in. And the Sisters of St. Joseph would be there for a long time. And this was this beautiful three-story house. They had a girls' school in there also, the St. Francis de Sales Academy. And they would take girls in boarding that would come and stay and learn the lessons of French and English and just a variety of things. And they would have plays and wonderful graduations. There was a grotto in the back of the building. And you can see a little bit here at the back. There's a little bit of an orchard. It looked like they had a greenhouse. They would have graduations back there. So it was a pretty big operation, and they had quite a few sisters that lived there. Jim started out talking about a wall. I should have mentioned not all the architectural ghosts are buildings. Sometimes there are these little things that we think about architecture. There's another beautiful stone wall that went along that garden all the way down to the Humidor house on the corner. I love this iron staircase that was on the side, a little statue on top. I mean, that was a wonderful, wonderful building that was here for a lot of years. It was torn down in the early 1950s to make Valley High School, and took up most of the back garden of the convent. Well, it was finally, there's another school on the property close to, you can just see the convent on the left there. The first school actually was on the church lot. In 1873, my father Weiss had a large stone building built. He wanted it to be a college. Unfortunately, he couldn't get the priests to come and teach or teachers to come, and it eventually became the rectory of the parish. But in 1893, they had been teaching boys in that building while the girls were being taught at the convent. In 1893, they built this magnificent building. Anybody know where that was at?
Yeah, the desert.
The desert, yeah. There's a reason it's called the desert. This is one of the class photos. I don't think Tom Greminger's here tonight, but Tom Greminger went to school in a little kindergarten that was across from the Lutheran Church. It's no longer here. He went to school in the Pratt warehouse, and he also went to school in this building. And he's only about 150 years old. So. This became the center of the parish. The whole top floor was an auditorium. And you see benefit dinners, dances, all kinds of things happening in the school. The Knights of Columbus would meet there. They also had a party room above Bill Nagger's store, his photography shop. But it was a lot of students over the years went through that building. The top floor was removed about 1940. It was called they thought it was a fire hazard. You can see there's no fire escapes on the building. So the top was taken off, and then again in the 1950s when they were building Valley High School and the playground, this building was torn down. And this is what it looks like today, the parking lot for the church and for the school. There's been a few things added to it. The playground was added later for the children behind the parish center, and then just within the last couple of years, they built a little pavilion with the picnic tables there. I'm going to switch. This is a great shot. This is from 1888, and it was Decoration Day, 1888. Now, the Grand Army of the Republic was founded in the 1870s after the Civil War by a guy in Decatur, Illinois. And one of the first commanders of that was an ex-general from Murfreesboro, Illinois. I can't remember the name of the school over there. It's named after him. But he was a famous guy. He said that on the 30th of May every year, we are going to decorate the graves of our fallen fellow soldiers. I mean, that's what really started Memorial Day. It kind of morphed into Memorial Day later on. Well, the first year that we had a Grand Army of the Republic here, we were post-365. And we should add that one of Ichabod Sardo's daughters was a girl named Susan Elizabeth St. James, or Elizabeth Sargent. She married Felix St. James, who our Civil War camp's named after because he was killed at the Battle of Shiloh in 1862. But the first year that they had this in 1887, the paper said, boy, there really wasn't much going on about memorializing those who had lost in war. So the next year, they had a crowd. We think this picture was taken from upstairs in the Southern Hotel. You can see the old courthouse. There's a flag that was on a string across from it. This is the old brick here. And in this carriage is Susan St. James, widow of Felix. And I have to tell you, Memorial Day was a big thing. Decoration Day was a big thing. Eventually, the GAR headquarters were out at Frank Hook's house, which is across the North Gabbery on one of those first cross streets. And they would march from there all the way up to the Memorial Cemetery. And then they would get in cars and go out to Valley Springs. And they had bands playing. We very little of the old patriotic marches and assemblies anymore. But all these guys had these little ribbons on. Those are GAR guys, and that's their GAR ribbon hanging there. But what I really wanted to talk about this picture was that building way in the background. You can see that the nice trees where they hitched horses by in front of the courthouse. But you see this big building that's got about 3 or 4 stories on it, or 2 stories long. It was called the Union Hall. And again, it was a place where they had dances. The La Guinée would go there after their romp around town and have big banquets and things. It was a dwelling. It was a saloon. It was a cigar factory and a public hall on the 3rd floor. And it had a billiard. It was like an all-inclusive party room kind of thing. So this building, in about 1905, they decided to tear it down. So we're still on the lot where the school is. That was a lot that there are no buildings left from 1894. But in 1906, this wonderful building was built, and this was the Joker's-Yealy Mercantile. Now, this is from a 1908 Drummers Magazine picture. So this is the corner of 3rd and Merchant, the northwest corner. They had previously been, you know where the Joker's-Yealy store was before they came here? Anybody familiar with where the Jug is?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that corner down there. They've got my various things. Even the Rosers were involved in some of that at one time. But they had moved up here, and they were probably the largest, but not the only, mercantile house in St. Genevieve. There was usually about that time here 4 to 5 mercantile stores all the time. I have the pictures from the old Bowley shut store that was across from the courthouse. There's rows upon rows of bookshelves of bolts of cloth. Where can you buy cloth in St. Genevieve now? Canned goods. It was just amazing what these people carried back then. Well, in 1922, that building burnt. And it took them 2 years to build a new building. And we don't have a picture right on of the new building, other than you kind of have a side view there, the 1931 picture. You can kind of see that it looked a little bit like the one on the right, which is a 1936 picture. There was an industrial survey done in 1931. We have a whole series of maybe about 10 photographs from that of various buildings, and again, they're some of our treasures. But in 1936, the Rosers leased the front part of the building on the bottom floor. They didn't own it, they leased it. Joker's-Yealy continued to operate upstairs. I think they had a grocery in the back. And then there was a facelift in 1974, and this is more familiar to those of us that have, since 2004 anyway, that was a change. You can see also that there was a building kind of added on the side here. Well, that was a Benjamin Franklin store that was added in 1939. Then I guess it was called a Five and Dime at one time. I don't know how much money I spent when we come back to see my dad and my kids and go, we want to go to Rosers, we want to go to Rosers. Joel's not going to be able to eat that tonight. So in 1974, they did that facelift. And there was a lot of things that started to happen in the 70s. Back up a little bit. You can see back here, there's a thing called Laurel Lumber Company. And a couple of residences, dwellings. I have pictures of those 2 dwellings there. I've never seen one. The Laurel Lumber Company had been there since around the turn of the century, maybe a little after. And so when in 1963, Rosers bought out Joker's-Yealy. And at that time, Moral Lumber still continued to operate, but by 1973, they were going to clear out, and they were bought by Riverside Lumber Company of Cape Girardeau, who then merged with, I guess it was Wayner Lumber Company, who's probably down across the Gallery, and they became eventually the Do It Center. They moved out to Point Base Plaza. The next expansion of the Rozier store occurred in 1880. They added the back end of the building and a variety store addition. It was about a 9,000 square foot addition. You might recognize some of the people over there.
Who's that hairy one?
Well, his brother Jack is on the left, and then there's, let's see, there's Bruce Lindstrom, and then the middle Joe the III, and his dad, Joseph Sr., and then Jack Myers, who ran, I guess he was vice president at the time. Joe, do you remember what your job was back then?
Custodian.
Custodian.
No, it wasn't. He had a job. He was the buyer for women's fashion apparel.
Oh, that makes sense.
I'm sorry, Joe. About 1990, the farmers market moved into the northwest end of the Rozier store parking lot. The covered structure was added in 1994, but eventually it moved to the KC Hall lot in 2010. I had to put Marianne on.
Yes, thank you for that.
Every Saturday morning, especially during blackberry season,
Who's the first one
Marianne
there?
Otto would make your morning happy. Of course, she's never gave me any blackberry cobbler, but she was famous. I don't know how many of you remember the little moving animals that she would bring to What's New, the little Santa Clauses and Easter bunnies. I have a few of those on tape. So, whoops, that's not supposed to be there. I had a little computer problem earlier today. Well, sadly, the Rozier store lamp business closed its doors in December 1995. Donna and Bill Sharon bought the building in mid-1996 and renamed it La Galerie of the French Quarter. Then they partnered with Tim Conley to make a 20,000 square foot antique and collectibles mall. And in October of that year, Larry Karen and Donna announced the creation of Karen's General Store that was supposed to be like a little ice cream shop and other things. And Larry was going to be dressed in French colonial costumes. He eventually moved it to the back of the store, and I never have found out yet the demise of it. But also in the back, after they left, in the back of the store, well, I guess it was about 2013 or 12 did the church buy it, Joe.
When did the church buy that? I would say around there, Bob.
Yeah, because in 2014 you opened up the Bird Center in December of that year. And the St. Vincent de Paul was in there until this week. And now they're out at the Ron Coleman's building. But that's kind of the end. When I look at the Valleys of being a powerful family of St. Genevieve in the colonial period, there's no question that the Roziers were the powerful family of the post-colonial
They
period.
still are, right?
Were.
The blood rolls, still roll, but it flows. Does anybody know where this building was?
Market Main. Merchant Main.
Merchant and Main's correct. The picture on the left is probably one of my favorite pictures of any old St. Genevieve house. It's magnificent. There's another one a little bit later around the turn of the century with a carriage out front. This was the home of Francis Claude Rozier, another one of the Rozier boys. Like I said, they were the two dudes of St. Genevieve. Their brother Felix built the house that is now the Inn St. John Bay, about 1850. Their brother Furman owned the academy around the same time period and opened it as a school. But this is just a magnificent building.
Mom, was that the same snowstorm?
I found that picture by accident at the State Historical Society. I'm going through a folder, all of a sudden it's one of those eureka moments. It's like when Jim and I found one of the Charles C. Wilshire house. So there's been some changes to that house. There was an addition, I can't tell if it was originally on there, but by 1894, you can see there's a little brick addition, which you can see in this picture. You can see that wrought iron fence that goes in front, still goes in front of the Inn St. Jim. It went along that whole block. There's also a dwelling in the back. I'm not sure what the brick dwelling, never had found out what that was for, but there was also a pigeon house and a smokehouse, a brick smokehouse. So this ends up kind of being that whole block where Sylvanus is too. But then by 1901, they had added this two-story addition on the left side. Again, another great view of that fence. You see that fence around, pieces of that fence around town. We've got that beautiful scallop on it, on the finial. Let's go back just a little. Francis's son, Francis was a merchant, as the Rosers were wont to be. And when his son Henry started out as a merchant, then became a banker. And in doing that, he had the bank where Gillette Real Estate was, there on the corner of 2nd and Merchant. His son Henry dies, I think, in the 30s. Some of the kids lived there for a while, but it eventually became just a derelict house. And in 1860, it was torn down and is now a parking lot for automobiles. I just can't believe the beauty of the four houses that the Rosers owned at the time. Anybody know where this was at?
Public school.
It was a school, yeah.
Corner of 2nd and Market.
Correct. It's not the first school. The first school is not the first school we know of. Actually, the school board rented the house across from where the foundation has its office there. I think it's the Bircha House in the 1860s. And then they built the first school down on Washington, and then in the 1870s they built this beautiful edifice on 2nd Street. Now there's a great history of this lot. It started out being owned by Jack Courtois, or Courtois, as most Americans call it, but it's Courtois. And he was one of the first settlers in what we call Newtown. Jim mentioned that you had J.B. Pratt on one corner, you had Francois Valley Jr. To the south, and then you had Jack Courtois on the northwest corner. And he sold it to a guy named John A. Jones in 1808, who sold it to a guy named John Scott in 1810. And John Scott is a famous St. Genevieve. He was our first territorial representative. He was our first U.S. representative. He was a wonderful lawyer who got the Lagione guys off when they got thrown in jail for running the DNA one year. He was a great lawyer. He did carry guns and dirks into the courtroom with him, and he cursed fluently from what I hear. But his house burnt down in 1870. Christmas Day. And then a few years later, this Board of Education put this building up as a public school. You can barely see on the backside there's kind of a regular fire escape, but I think there was a tube fire escape that people had to slide down the inside of this tube to get out of there. Here's stories about that. Here you can see this is in 1908, it's called the German Church, the Lutheran Church. You can just barely see the school in the background. And today, in the 1950s, the Southwestern Bell decided to build their building there across from Lions Club Park. And just after that, about 1959, Bank of St. Genevieve opened it up. And later on, the Bank of St. Genevieve moved out to Black Point Base, and the building was bought by the Colonial Dames of America in the state of Missouri, I think about 2014, and in 2018 they opened their Center for French Colonial Life Museum in that building. There was a house behind there, which is now a parking lot, and also the Reminger house was the next one down. We don't have pictures of the front of either one of those two adjacent houses. So anybody know where this house is?
Is?
Was. Yeah, that's what we probably was.
It looks like your house.
It does look like my house, and Jim and I were at Mercantile Library going through a file, and this was another one of those eureka moments. I said, that's my house. And the more we looked at it, we said, that's not my house. You see this little thing on the side, and then the porch is a little different. This was the home of Dr. Joshua Barton Cox. In April of 1880, he had moved here from French Village. The newspaper reported that he would build between the Odd Fellows Hall, which I think was Bill Naggers upstairs, and this is Janice, or Janice, which I remember showing you that moment that house was built. A July 24th, 1880 Fair Play article reported the house was almost completed and that it would be ready for occupancy in a few days. Isn't that wonderful? You can almost pin to the day when a house is finished. Joshua Cox had been born in Fredericktown. He went to school in Lebanon, Tennessee, St. Louis Medical College, went to school in Philadelphia, came back, worked in St. Louis Hospital for a while, and then he went, came to St. Genevieve, but for ill health, he went to French Village, but eventually came back. So, what convinced me that that was not my house was that in this photograph, you see the house, the Dr. Cox house, and through the trees, you can see my house.
So that's what a post office is?
That's where the post office is. So this is what Merchant Street looked like in probably 1890 to 1900. And as you said, this is where the post office was. It changed hands and eventually became owned by Felix Petrican. It had been sold to him by a guy named Peter H. Hook, whose wife was Annie Cox. And also in the Bogey house, there were the Coxes lived, some of their, I think it was William B. Cox lived in that house. One of the things you always know about St. Genevieve families, they tend to kind of congregate together and marry in similar families.
You can say
But
that.
when the postmaster came over, he says, would you like to see some pictures of the building, the post office? Yes. So I copied all of these, and so it was just various stages. But the one that really, there was a couple of my house in it, but this one up building that stands on the back. Can anybody guess what that building is?
The way station?
No. It's on Main Street. Used to be a cleaners.
Audi Cleaner.
Audi Cleaners. But is Audi Cleaners a 2-story or 3-story? It's a 2-story. It's actually a 3-story building back in 1939. And they took, as they did at the school, they took that top. And here is the post office as we see it today. So there's other architectural details that sometimes are inside of these buildings. There is the wainscoting in this building is St. Genevieve marble, which there were 5 different colors. It's been used in buildings all over the United States. The Declaration of Independence is surrounded by St. Genevieve marble. But if you go in this building, you can see one of the different colors. And on the wall, you can see a painting of the La Guillenée by Martel, who was a student at the St. Genevieve Art Colony, but eventually, this was a Treasury Department program. Just about all the post offices that have art in them, all of the same box. just different bricks, different colors. It's like a modern subdivision. But all, so she painted that, it got up, I think, in about 1942. So, what do you think this house was? The picture on the left is the clue, actually. So, you could actually see a part of this house in that one, the first picture of looking down Merchant Street. This was called the Bovary House, the John L. Bovary. He was the son of John Mueller Bovary, who was a merchant. They had the Bovary store up on Main Street that eventually, I think up until they had until the 1930s, it had burned. They had rebuilt it. But eventually, I think there was a hardware store in there, different things over the years. The church had it for a while as the band room and weight room and different things. But John L. Bovary was, again, pretty well-to-do. The Bovary family were Belgians, actually, by background. And so they had this beautiful house, which is across from the post office. Got a couple of pictures even of the backyard. You can kind of see how big these houses were. I think he was trying to emulate the Rosers, what he was trying to do, but he didn't make it. He didn't make it. So this is now the law office of Lansbury. And back in the 1950s, Citizens Electric bought it and built this 1950s architecture. It's another one of those periods that's not been in our best interest architecturally. But it was a sign of the times, and now Edward Jones and else is in there. Okay, I think this is the last one. Maybe no, it's the second last one. So, anybody guess where this is at? You can kind of look down the street. But one of the things I want you to look at the street lamp.
Yeah.
Does that look familiar? So I think that was one of the patterns they used when they started redoing the street lamps in the Great River Roads expansion.
Is that Market?
This is Market and Main. So, Main. It is on the northeast corner. So this was this at one time it was an implement place. I think Telathics owned it at one time. And Joseph Jacob bought it from the Telathics, and sometime between 1901 and 1911, the building changed. This is, well, it was before 1908, between 1908, because this is a 1908 Drummers Magazine picture. And you can see that here was the agricultural implement place up there. Down here, it's still agricultural implement, but they show the mansard roof, which I thought was rather kind of clever. Another clue when we look at architecture. The cement warehouse was still in the back here, that they had later. In the 1908 Drummers Magazine, they had pictures of the inside of this building, of all the carriages and things. I think there's 2 or 3. Pretty magnificent. And eventually, anybody know what that was? I only had a glimpse. This was a picture of another house, but this was in the background. It's on the same corner, and that was Ed L. Bowman's gas station, early gas station. So in 1945, there's that one building that's behind there's auto repair, but then here's that little gas station, which is kind of a cute little 1940s style thing you would see along Route 66. That went into the 70s. Sorry about this picture, I took it off of microfilm, but this was in about 1981. Ed L. was expanding. It was a Phillips 66 station. He has a big canopy over it. And then, as part of the Great River Roads project, they started in February of, I think it was 1987, and they had it torn, that old building torn down. They had this built, and I think the next year we had the dedication of the Great River Roads Welcome Center, Visitor Center. Last one, anybody guess where this one was at?
JD Valley.
It was the JD Valley Yard, and this was the
Carriage house?
no, not, well, I guess it could be, but a barn,
Yeah.
I think would be a more proper term. The Historic American Building Survey indicated it was built about 1857, and it lasted over 100 years. It collapsed in a snowstorm in February of 1982. And that was kind of the demise of it. It was pretty, in fact, the picture on the left is from the 1937 pads, so it was in pretty good shape, but over the years it kind of deteriorated. Kind of makes you sad seeing a building go away like that. Well, it did go away in that snowstorm. Questions?
No questions?
Have you ever done any research down on the east side of Main Street where Home Depot is?
Yeah, one of the things that was difficult, I mean, we could probably be here for like 10 days to really get into, because remember, 50% of the buildings, just these little blocks are gone. And some of the outhouses. And then Jim and I were talking about, there's all the areas outside of that area, which could be subject for discussion. I'm going to have to wait a couple months to convince him to do some more of this. If you're interested, we may do some more of this, just to...
Wasn't the original firehouse down for Genevieve down in that area?
There was a firehouse that was located next to the powerhouse. Yes, it's still there. Sam Conlon's building. And that was built in 1908. That's when our sewers and electrical systems went in. And I think it was Mr. that won the contract for that. But yeah, that's still here. And there was also a lime plant down there. Yes, Bob.
Was there any one specific quarry or area for all the stone walls and foundation stones or any of that?
I don't know about, if it was sandstone, we know where the sandstone quarries were. We know where the marble quarries were. I don't know exactly. I mean, there were limestone being mined all over for lime and riprap and that sort of thing. There's one picture I wanted to mention. I think it was, maybe I can get back to it. Backwards. If you notice here, these are sandstone curves. Only down on 2nd Street between Merchant and Jefferson, are the only ones I know about that are still left. And those were quarried just south of town here. Quarry Town, I guess. Yeah. So it's really, we not only lose buildings and stuff, we lose the little architectural details that kind of make you sad sometimes.
I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard the East Bridge stone work, and all that stone come from here.
The abutments for the East Bridge, were made from our sandstone. Also, the Iowa State House was made from St. Genevieve sandstone. We had an Iowa connection. Henry Dodge's son, Augustus Caesar Dodge, and the other first senator had married a great white girl from Iowa, the Iowa senator. So they were kind of in cahoots with St. Genevieve, and that's how the stone got up to be used in the Iowa State House.
Do you know anything about the stone house that used to be around where the telephone company is? On Merchant, I'm sorry. The Bold Loop went over, and then there was a stone house facing Market Street.
Where was that? No.
Behind Lanier.
Lanier, and facing Margaret Street, a stone house that was totally dismantled and hidden away.
No, that's, I think, isn't it the house that was the one that was torn down?
It wasn't torn down, it was taken apart
Yeah,
and sitting somewhere.
I think
Oh,
that,
no. You mean the Beauvais house that was built out on 61?
No.
No.
I
This was still there. There were cars, early 1900s, because we saw pictures when we worked at
Yeah, it was
Center for
dismantled.
French Colonial Life. They had a picture when that was the garage that was next, what do I mean?
oh,
Colonial
you're
House.
talking about the Dutchman's house?
Yes.
Brick one?
Yeah, yeah.
It's,
Oh, it was
it's
brick.
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 It's a brick building. a two-story
Well, there was
building.
was the Pratt warehouse brick or was that stone?
Pratt warehouse was stone.
Behind, I'm talking about the one behind, wasn't there a small
The drawing says.
warehouse behind the Dutchman?
I don't know about that.
But in your diagram,
Well, no, there was a store that was built by Rene Lemieux. That was brick.
was that right too?
One, it would face,
This face mark.
Well, it's, I don't know, I've never seen one on any of the maps. We know about the Dutchman, the house in this original.
you think it was still there in 1901?
In the 1900s. Around 1900.
Well, we'll go back and look at that map.
Look at those house now.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
The Sandworm map.
Sandboard maps, because that's what I did when we bought our house in Second.
Right.
And
That would go back to
That had
1896.
a tobacco warehouse in the back. All those outbuildings that you're talking about,
Yeah.
you know?
I was gonna pull up that 1894 maps.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so, G-Board.
You can go to the next.
Go to the E, or,
Yeah.
yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, you're talking about right in here.
Yeah. This is a school. So I guess it wasn't there then. 'Cause this is one of the pictures when we worked there. Because this is when the garage.
This was the Dutchman Hotel.
Yeah.
Started out as Rene Lemieux's store.
And then it was a time when it was.
Well, the Commons was the next part before it was the Dutchman.
Right.
That was in
Yeah.
the-
And then it was like, it was
Where do you remember it being?
where I was just pointing, wasn't it?
It was facing Margaret,
Facing this street.
somewhat behind the Lenore house.
Okay, that's a new one on me.
Yeah,
Can you say you have a photograph on it?
No,
There'd be archives.
we have a lot. The French Colonial Center has information.
Okay.
They all that stuff in their archives, and she used to do the archives.
We'd love to see it.
yeah. We always learn, that's why we have these things, we always learn something.
You did?
I did see the.
Wow.
All right.
Good, thank you.
Can I ask a question about Jesse James? Now, on the corner, where is it, on Merchant and something, there's a bank. I was told that that's the one he shot the holes in, because they're bullet holes in the building, but that's not the one.
There was a bank robbery in 1939 in that building,
Oh,
but for years, we had horses out in front of that saying, that's the bank Jesse James robbed. It was the bank that was down in the corner.
and it's gone.
It's gone.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's one of those brick buildings that I had in mind. And
The picture's right in there. With the, with the,